Hi guys, I'm Maylin Dovan, certified athletic therapist and founder of Rehab-U Movement and Performance Therapy, and I'm here with Marc-Antoine.
Yeah, you can say Mark.
Mark?
Hi guys, my name is Mark. I'm a former professional athlete in the Oakland A's organization, and right now I'm working in baseball with the Academy of Baseball Canada here in Montreal.
So we're going to talk about rotational athletes, so high performance for rotational athletes. Today we're going to talk about T-spine mobility, which of course is a hot topic in training, but also a hot topic with rotational athletes. And we always, or people always assume that rotational athletes need a lot of mobility, which of course is true, but we need to make sure that we're working on the right aspects of mobility with the right athletes. So why would you say that mobility is important for a rotational athlete? I mean, it seems obvious, but
it seems obvious, yeah. No, it's a very important component of, let's say, for baseball players, for pitching and hitting. You need that rotation, as you said. Because especially for throwing, so you need that rotation to position the scapula to get great external rotation, and when you get that max external rotation, you're in a position to throw a baseball at a very fast speed, right? So if you don't have that, you're going to need compensations, which is not really what we want, because you get compensations, you get muscles to do not really what they're supposed to do, and that's where you get injuries, right? So we need that rotation to make sure the scap is really on a solid base, usually with pitchers.
Yeah, so we're on that same page that mobility is important and that rotational athletes need mobility, but sometimes the focus is just always to drive that mobility, whereas when I was discussing with Marc-Antoine, what he was saying to me is that, well, some athletes at a specific stage maybe will need mobility. They'll have some hypomobility, or they'll be lacking some thoracic mobility, but then we've got other players who are either already adapted or naturally have a lot of mobility. So we're just driving mobility into someone who already has a lot of mobility. So we just want to highlight the difference between working on gaining mobility, working on maintaining mobility, or working on creating some stability, some stiffness, some control within mobility that players already have, so that you can better individualize what you're going to do with each player based on what they present with. Okay, so why don't you take us through the test that you use initially to see whether a player needs or has appropriate mobility.
We're going to look at the seated T-spine rotation. So Ludo's going to just sit on whatever piece of equipment he has to sit on, and then he's got a foam roll in between his thighs to make sure his lumbar spine is locked, because we really want to look at T-spine rotation. So if we see he can rotate on this side, rotate on the other side. Usually you want to see 50 to 70 degrees of active control for rotational athletes. For him, you see he's got pretty good mobility on both sides, right? Because we kind of want equal rotation. What we can do with this, we can look at his active rotation. So if you rotate on either side, and then I can see passively, he's really close to his passive range and end range, right? So see, he's pretty good.
So he can actively access a lot of his range of motion, which is important.
Yep. And we can look at Will as well. Same thing, where we can see we got to work on shoulder mobility as well as a clearing.
And what we can see with Will through the hips, if the camera can point to that, is that he's getting a lot of extra rotation or he's looking for more rotation by moving the hips, right?
Exactly.
It's not as well dissociated as it was with Ludo. So when you mentioned if you don't have that proper mobility, you're going to compensate somewhere else. That's kind of what we're seeing here. What's his passive range versus active? So there's active.
It's pretty good. Yeah.
So there's a little more wiggle room.
Yeah, exactly. So we can see he's got a little bit more to tap in, and we can also use this exercise for him, this test as exercise, right? So we can use this as rotation. We can add some...
To help increase rotation.
Yeah, exactly. Use this. We can add a little side bend and an expiration. We can mix it with breathing. So it's pretty cool tool in the toolbox.
Awesome. Yep. All right. Let's head over to the wall and see. Now, we've got one player who's got good mobility, and we certainly want to maintain that mobility. And then we've got one player who's got a little bit less mobility, so we're going to try to tap into some more mobility. So let's look at a classic mobility drill, prisoner T-spine rotation. For Ludo, who's got good mobility, we're just working on helping him maintain that active range of motion, and we can get him into like a split squat athletic stance, right? And then he's working on going through some active rotation. And we can get him even closer to the wall if we want to, and that's going to challenge him a little bit more.
You see under his mask, he's smiling. He's having a lot of fun.
He's loving it. Awesome. Good. So we can use this kind of drill for Ludo to maintain that mobility. With Will, we want to focus more on mobility. We want to lock the hips a little bit more, so we're actually going to get him kneeling. So we're going to get him kneeling and a little bit closer to the wall. Yeah, good. And then ideally, I could also even put my foam roller in over here so that he's got a good solid base to keep his hips stable. And now he can really focus on that thoracic rotation and compensate less through the hips and come forward a little bit more. Turn, yes, good. So we've got him kneeling on the ground as opposed to in the athletic split stance, so he can really bring his focus to his rotation because he needs to work on that a little bit more. Awesome. And then in both cases, right, we want to work on stabilizing that. So we want that control element.
Yeah, exactly, because it's one thing to mobilize, but it's another thing to have control within the range, as we said, right? So if we want to progress after those exercises, we got the wide stance rotations that we can use with a little elastic band. So Ludo is going to demonstrate it. What we want as one thing is that for baseball athletes who are striding out, we need good adductor length, right? So sometimes that's a problem. So we're going to make sure that he can widen out his stance to work on these adductors. He's also going to squeeze the glutes to make sure his upper body is rotating on a solid base, which is important for dissociation from the lower body to the upper body, which is very, very important for us rotational athletes, right? So it's going to rotate. He can do it a couple ways. So he can use rotation all the way with his hands, with his eyes following his hands, doing this under control. He's very good at stabilizing. We can also use this maybe with a little harder band. You can just stop in the middle, so it's kind of a mix with wide stance rotation and Pallof press, right? So.
Yeah.
It's pretty good for creating stability because it's one thing to rotate, but you gotta also earn that rotation with anti-rotation that we can see here.
Amazing. So in either cases, whether we have someone who's got good mobility and we're working on maintaining that mobility, or someone who's missing a little bit, so who needs to gain a little bit more mobility, we can use a mobility drill and we can adjust it based on the player that we're working with. And then either way, after we've done that mobility drill, we've done that mobilization, we've created that space, now we want to have them work with control within that space. So they can use an exercise like the wide stance horizontal chop to work on, one, dissociating that rotation from the hips, but creating that stability within that rotation. So being able to accelerate, decelerate, and control that. Right, awesome. All right, so hopefully that helps to just kind of shed some light on how much mobility are we trying to drive? Like, are we trying to increase mobility? Or are we trying to just have players working through mobility with some assistance, for example, with the wall? And then after we've done that, after we've created that space, what can we do to work on stability within that? So what can we do to create stiffness that they need to control that rotation?